All right, guys, so we're going to read chapter 6. Notice it's called Pearl, so it's probably going to be about Pearl and thinking about her name and why she's named this, and of course, how Pearl is a living symbol of Hester's sin. We have as yet hardly spoken of the infant, that little creature whose innocent life had sprung by the inscrutable decree of Providence, a lovely and immortal flower. She's compared right off the bat here to nature. So here we're seeing that this is a metaphor comparing her to nature, specifically a flower, out of the rank luxuriance of guilty passion. So remember this part, she comes, of course, she is a product of sin. So she's probably not going to quite fit in to society, right? Given that she comes into the world as a product of true love. Yes, they loved each other, but also it was against the law, and it's a crime in their society to have this extramarital affair. How strange it seemed to the sad woman as she watched the growth and the beauty that became every day more brilliant, and the intelligence that threw its quivering sunshine over the tiny features of this child, her Pearl. Okay, so a couple things that seem interesting. She grows up to be beautiful. So we see here some DC of Pearl. And we also see this use of exclamation points here. Notice her pearl, the meaning of the pearl. So a pearl is something that costs a great deal, right? It's worth a lot, but it also costs a lot. So it's something that's rare, a pearl, but it's also something that's expensive and, again, costs a great deal. So Pearl, of course, is the product of the sin, and she did cost her mother a great deal. So we also here see that Pearl is connected to the sunshine, right? So when we think about here, if you think about Pearl and how is Pearl connected to sunshine, that's going to be important. For so had Hester called her, not as a name expressive of her aspect, which had nothing of the calm, white, unimpassioned luster that would be indicated by the comparison. So she's not compared to her because of the way she looks specifically, right, or her specific actions. Pearl is not calm, we're going to soon find out. And then we again have the name further described here. But she named the infant Pearl as being of great price, purchased with all she had, her mother's only treasure. So here you're seeing the reason for the name that I was just talking about is actually twofold. She cost a great deal, right? What she cost her mother to have her, of course, the shame, the dishonor, the crime, the prison time, all of that. But she's also called her mother's only treasure. How strange indeed. Man had marked this woman's sin by a scarlet letter, which had such potent and disastrous efficacy that no human sympathy could reach her, save it were sinful like herself. God, as a direct consequence of the sin which man thus punished, had given her a lovely child, whose place was on that same dishonored bosom, to connect her parent forever with the race and descent of mortals, and to be finally a blessed soul in heaven. Yet these thoughts affected Hester Prynne less with hope than apprehension. Okay, going backwards a little bit here with our word choice of efficacy. So for the denotation of this word, it's the ability to produce a desired or intended result. So if you want to just jot down something about like maybe ability to produce a certain result. Okay. God, as a direct consequence of the sin which man thus punished, had given her a lovely child. So notice here, she's described as a lovely child, but notice that the connection is made. This place was on that same dishonored bosom. So we're seeing how Pearl and the A, that's an equal sign there, are really one and the same. And you'll notice throughout the novel, Pearl is often fixated with her mother's A, and she often is focused on it. Okay, so here we see the descent of mortals. So where people fall, right, where they fall short of the expectation society has for what they should do, going back to our essential question with right from wrong. And then again, notice again the use of exclamation points by Hawthorne. Yet these thoughts affected Hester Prynne less with hope than apprehension. So, meaning Hester obviously notices Pearl's character and notices the connection between the letter and Pearl as a human. She knew that her deed had been evil. Notice that word choice of evil. She could have no faith, therefore, that its result would be good. So that it's predictive here that then, is Pearl then bad? I'm going to write, is P bad? Question mark. Again, sorry, I'm not great at writing on this. Day after day, she looked fearfully into the child's expanding nature, ever dreading to detect some dark and wild peculiarity that should correspond with the guiltiness to which she owed her being. So again, the connection is being made pretty directly here in the beginning between Pearl as a human being and that her attributes, right, her characteristics, are going to be connected to bad or evil things because of the fact that she came from sin, right, that she's a product of sin. Certainly, there was no physical defect. So she physically is fine, right? There's no deformity. By its perfect shape, its vigor, and its natural dexterity in the use of all its untried limbs, the infant was worthy to have been brought forth in Eden. So this is an allusion, right, to the Garden of Eden. Worthy to have been left there, to be the plaything of the angels. So she is worthy. Interesting. She's worthy to be among the angels after the world's first parents were driven out. So that's, of course, referring to then to Adam and Eve. So again, this allusion carries to two places. The child had a native grace. Notice the words associated with her. Native, grace, things like nature, which does not invariably coexist with faultless beauty. Its attire, however simple, always impressed the beholder as if it were the very garb that precisely became it best. But little Pearl was not clad in rustic weeds. Her mother, with a morbid purpose that may be better understood hereafter, had bought the richest tissues that could be procured. Procured seems like that could be obtained. And here, notice what we're learning is that Hester, I'm just going to write H, makes like beautiful clothes for Pearl. Remember how she dresses up the actual A on her chest? This is a parallel to that. So remember, if Pearl is the living embodiment of Hester's sin, and of course she has to wear the A on her chest, then she's doing the same thing. She's having the A on her chest be beautifully adorned in gold, and remember, all fancy. She's having her daughter be dressed in a similar fashion. She's dressing her up to look beautiful. And allowed her imaginative faculty its full play in the arrangement and decoration of the dresses which the child wore. So she's very imaginative in the way that she makes the clothes, which the child wore before the public eye. So magnificent was the small figure when thus arrayed, and such was the splendor of Pearl's own proper beauty. So she herself is very beautiful. So she's in beautiful clothes, and Pearl herself is beautiful, shining through the gorgeous robes which might have extinguished a paler loveliness. So the clothes might have overtaken a less beautiful child, and you would have only noticed the clothes. But here, because Pearl is so beautiful too, they're both beautiful and, standing out together. That there was an absolute circle of radiance around her on the darksome cottage floor. So a couple word choices here, right? Radiance, shining, gorgeous, beauty, splendor, magnificent. So notice again the positive diction being associated with Pearl. And yet a russet gown, torn and soiled with the child's rude play, made a picture of her just as perfect. So she was beautiful no matter what she was wearing. Pearl's aspect was imbued with a spell of infinite variety. In this one child, there were many children, comprehending the full scope between the wildflower prettiness, notice the wildflower prettiness, of a peasant baby and the pomp and little of an infant princess. Interesting. Throughout all, however, there was a trait of passion. Ooh, so her number one trait, P, is mostly, right? She's mostly passionate. She's described as beautiful. So she's passionate, she's beautiful. She's often with nature. A certain depth of hue, which she never lost. And if in any of her changes she had grown fainter or paler, she would have ceased to be herself. It would have been no longer Pearl! Exclamation notice. So far, we've learned quite a bit about Pearl here. So we're seeing a lot of direct characterization. Specifically how she looks is being the focus of this paragraph. And then how that, of course, also relates to her personality, which will be discussed more soon. This outward mutability indicated and did not more than fairly express the various properties of her inner life. So she has a pretty awesome imagination. Oops, sorry, again. Her nature appeared to possess depth. Okay, so she had a depth of nature. So she seems mature and wise for her years, as well as a variety. That word variety has been repeated, right? So we're seeing repetition. But or else Hester's fears deceived her. It lacked reference and adaptation. So far we're seeing that Pearl, notice this depth of character. By that we're looking at she's a complex person. So because of that complexity, we're going to see that there are many facets to her personality. To the world into which she was born. The child could not be made amenable to rules. So amenable means that she would follow them or be cooperative, like cooperate with the rules. So she does not cooperate with the rules. So we'll see here P does not like rules. Well, that's probably because she comes from a huge one being broken, right? So Pearl represents the fact that her mom broke rules. So it's interesting that Pearl herself will break rules. In giving her existence, so notice in having the child, a great law had been broken. So because she comes from sin and she comes from an act that was a crime, she herself does not fit into society. So not fit in. So we find out here the result was a being whose elements were perhaps beautiful and brilliant, but all in disorder. Notice that word disorder. Or with an order peculiar to themselves. Again, peculiar, amidst which the point of variety and arrangement was difficult or impossible to be discovered. Hester could only account for the child's character, and even then most vaguely and imperfectly, by recalling what she herself had been during that momentous period while Pearl was imbibing her soul from the spiritual world, and her bodily frame from its material of earth. The mother's impassioned state, so this is referring to the affair. Because Pearl comes from the affair, they're really making a connection between the act of having extramarital sex, which was against the law, created a person who doesn't follow the rules of the law. The mother's impassioned state had been the medium through which were transmitted to the unborn infant, so we're told that directly, transmitted to the unborn infant, the rays of its moral life. Notice again this connection, sin, right? Sin versus morality. And however, white and clear originally, they had taken the deep stains of crimson and gold. Those are interesting colors. Look at the imagery here. The imagery, notice the crimson, the scarlet letter is red, crimson. She also adorns it with gold. Remember, pearl's often referred to as around sunshine, and she's often dressed in red, like the letter A. So that's all coming in here. Had taken the deep stains of crimson and gold, the fiery luster, the black shadow, and the untempered light of the intervening substance. Above all, the warfare of Hester's spirit at that epoch was perpetuated in pearl. Okay, notice, and an epoch, remember, is for the denotation, again, we saw this on a previous quiz, is the pinnacle moment. Okay, sorry, often with epic pronunciation as well there. She could recognize her wild, desperate, defiant mood, the flightiness of her temper, and even some of the very cloud shapes of gloom and despondency that had brooded in her heart. They were now illuminated by the morning radiance of a young child's disposition, but later in the day of earthly existence might be prolific of the storm and whirlwind. So prolific, notice for denotation here, prolific means present like in large numbers, right? Plentiful. So in case we didn't have that. And then also noticing here what we learn about pearl here. Defiant mood, flightiness of temper, gloom, despondency, brooded. So we're seeing that the bad things, right, that come from what Hester did, those also live in pearl. So pearl embodies several things we find out in this first paragraph here. The discipline of the family in those days was of a far more rigid kind than now. The frown, the harsh rebuke, the frequent application of the rod, enjoined by scriptural authority, so of the scripture, were used not merely in the way of punishment for actual offenses, but as a wholesome regimen for the growth and promotion of all childish virtues. So here, notice the role of religion with the scripture. Remember, this is an example of government and religion are one and the same in this puritanic code of law they have. So they're telling you here how they handle the misbehavior. Not merely in the way of punishment for actual offenses, so not necessarily just because you did something wrong, but also to promote then a certain kind of behavior that's positive. Hester Prynne, nevertheless, the lonely mother of this one child, ran little risk of erring on the side of undue severity, mindful, however, of her own errors and misfortune. She early sought to impose a tender but strict control over the infant immortality that was committed to her charge. So she's, kind but fair, right? Strict but nice. But the task was beyond her skill. So there's something a little bit uncontrollable. Uncontrollable about Pearl. And we see here that her mother kind of tries to keep her in check as best she can, but she's not always successful at being able to do that. After testing both smiles and frowns and proving that neither mode of treatment possessed any calculable influence, Hester was ultimately compelled to stand aside and permit the child to be swayed by her own impulses. So notice that we see this as Hester as a parent. And as a parent, Hester basically feels like, okay, well, I tried to control her by being nice. I tried to control her by being mean. Neither worked, right? She just does what she wants. So Pearl seems to just do what she wants. Oops. So what? And her mom eventually is just like, okay, I'm just going to give in to that because she's not able to control her. Okay, so that's this part. Hester was compelled to stand aside and let the child do as she wanted to do. Remember, because they're ostracized and they're outcast from society, pretty much Pearl and Hester just have each other. They don't have like a lot of other human connections. They really just have each other. Physical compulsion or restraint was effectual, of course, while it lasted. As to any other kind of discipline, whether addressed to her mind or heart, little Pearl might or might not be within its reach, in accordance with the caprice that ruled the moment. Her mother, while Pearl was yet an infant, grew acquainted with a certain peculiar look. That word peculiar has been repeated, so repetition there, that warned her when it would be labor thrown away to insist, persuade, or plead. It was a look so intelligent, yet inexplicable, so perverse, sometimes so malicious, but generally accompanied by a wild flow of spirits. Notice these word choices. Inexplicable means unable to be explained. Perverse, that's negative. Malicious is negative. But yet then she has this flow of spirits. So she seems, Pearl, I'm doing equals. She seems like a free spirit. She doesn't like the Puritan society's rules, and so she doesn't abide by them. She also doesn't want Hester's rules. She doesn't really abide by those either. So she's very much drawn by her own moral code, her own choices, and her own decisions. She's very independent in that way. So, generally accompanied by a wild flow of spirits that Hester could not help questioning at such moments whether Pearl were a human child. So interesting. So she even questions, is she human? She seemed rather an airy sprite, which after playing its fantastic sports for a little while upon the cottage floor would flit away with a mocking smile. Whenever that look appeared in her wild, notice again, bright, deeply black eyes, this is like Hester. Notice she's like her mother in a lot of ways, especially when she's described physically. It invested her with a strange remoteness and intangibility. That intangible means like unable to be touched or felt. It was as if she were hovering in the air and might vanish, like a glimmering light. So that's a simile. That comes we know not whence, and goes we know not whither. Beholding it, Hester was constrained to rush towards the child, to pursue the little elf in the flight. So now we find out this is a little elf. In the flight which she invariably began, to snatch her to her bosom with a close pressure and earnest kisses, not so much from overflowing love as to assure herself that Pearl was flesh and blood. We keep coming back to this idea of, the same question here. Is she human? We see that same question being repeated. And not utterly delusive. But Pearl's laugh, when she was caught, though full of merriment and music, made her mother more doubtful than before. So again, it's this kind of weird duality inside of Pearl. She's happy, but yet she's, causes a lot of trouble. And so we see a lot of almost antithetical characteristics in her. Heart smitten at this bewildering and baffling spell that so often came between herself and her sole treasure. Notice again the idea of her being a pearl. Pearl described as a treasure. Whom she had bought so dear. So remember, again, this has been repeated. Remember, because she came at a great cost. So P was a great cost. Going, of course, back to her mother's sin and then her subsequent penalty for being in jail and then being ostracized and wearing the A. And who was all her world, Hester sometimes burst into passionate tears. Then perhaps, for there was no foreseeing how it might affect her, Pearl would frown and clench her little fist and harden her small features into a stern, unsympathizing look of discontent. Not seldom she would laugh anew and louder than before, like a thing incapable and unintelligent of human sorrow. So she's laughing at her mother's passionate tears. Again, we're seeing some, Pearl is kind of rebellious. She doesn't like fit the mold and the rules. Like a thing incapable, notice we know she is capable and she is intelligent. So that begs the question kind of what's going on with Pearl when she reacts like this. Or, but this more rarely happened, she would be convulsed with a rage of grief and sob out her love for her mother in broken words and seem intent on proving that she had a heart by breaking it. Yet Hester was hardly safe in confiding herself to that gusty tenderness. It passed as suddenly as it came. Brooding over all these matters, the mother felt like one who has evoked a spirit, but by some irregularity in the process of conjuration has failed to win the master word that should control this new and incomprehensible intelligence. Her only real comfort was when the child lay in the placidity of sleep, so meaning calmness here, right? Placid. Then she was sure of her and tasted hours of quiet, sad, delicious happiness. So really we see that she is most, like Pearl, is really only calm when she's sleeping. So she's often described as like very wild. Then she was sure of her and tasted hours of quiet, sad, delicious happiness, until perhaps with that perverse expression glimmering from beneath her opening lids, little Pearl awoke, exclamation point. Notice ascendaton here, right? There's no conjunction used. And those are interesting words to put together. Quiet, sad, delicious. Thinking of the imagery there that creates. Delicious is an interesting word choice too. Thinking about taste. How soon, with what strange rapidity, indeed, did Pearl arrive at an age that was capable of social intercourse? So she's going to be interacting with people or not, beyond the mother's ever-ready smile and nonsense words. And when what a happiness would it have been could Hester Prynne have heard her clear, bird-like voice mingling with the uproar of other childish voices, and have distinguished and unraveled her own darling's tones amid all the entangled outcry of a group of sportive children. So talking about the children of the town. But this could never be. Pearl was a born outcast. So notice she's born an outcast because of what her mom did. So P is alone with only Hester as a confidant. So she only has her mom. Pearl was born an outcast of the infantile world, an imp of evil, emblem. So notice here you're directly told that she's a product of sin, a symbol of evil. She had no right among christened infants. Nothing, notice again that they were Christian, seeing that maybe she's not. Nothing was more remarkable than the instinct, as it seemed, with which the child comprehended her loneliness, the destiny that had drawn an inviolable circle around her, the whole peculiarity, in short, of her position in respect to other children. So she's aware of this. Never since her release from prison had Hester met the public gaze without her. So she's constantly been with Pearl. In all her walks about the town, Pearl, too, was there. First as the babe in arms, and afterwards as the little girl, small companion of her mother, holding a forefinger with her whole grasp, and tripping along at the rate of 3 or 4 footsteps to one of Hester's. She saw the children of the settlement on the grassy margin of the street, or at the domestic thresholds, disporting themselves in such grim fashion as the puritanic nurture would permit. So notice again this idea that, you follow all the rules and you have no fun. So they're only allowed to have fun to a degree. Playing at going to church, perchance, or at scourging Quakers. Quakers are a different religion. Or taking scalps in a sham fight with the Indians, or scaring one another with freaks of imitative witchcraft. Pearl saw and gazed intently, but never sought to make acquaintance. So she never tried to be their friend. So we see it's like Pearl has no friends. But she doesn't try to make them either. She doesn't want to be their friend, right? So we see that here. She doesn't try to make their acquaintance. If spoken to, she would not speak again, so she doesn't speak back when they talk to her. If the children gathered about her, as they sometimes did, Pearl would grow positively terrible in her puny wrath, snatching up stones to fling at them, with shrill, incoherent exclamations that made her mother tremble, because they had so much the sound of a witch's anathemas in some unknown tongue. Okay, so we have a word choice here that we don't know. Anathemas mean curses, right? So you're cursing things that you hate. So like curses of hate. And we see here what she does is she throws stones. And reacts very negatively to the people. Again, she doesn't like the Puritans. She doesn't fit in with them, right? Going back to her being a product of her mother breaking the Puritan rule. Pearl embodies that. The truth was that the little Puritans, being of the most intolerant brood that ever lived, notice they're not, we know that about them. By now, we definitely know that Puritans tolerate almost nothing. They're extremely strict, right, in their religious code. Had got a vague idea of something outlandish, unearthly, or at variance with ordinary fashions in the mother and child, and therefore scorned them in their hearts, and not unfrequently reveled them with their tongues. So, like their parents, right? The kids do the same thing the parents do. They scorn, gossip about them, call them names. So again, you see here that children are doing as their parents have shown them and taught them what to do. Pearl felt the sentiment and requited it with the bitterest hatred that can be supposed to rankle in a childish bosom. So notice this is Pearl's reaction, right? To the Puritan children. So we see here that bitterest hatred seems important as far as word choice. That can be supposed to rankle in a childish bosom. These outbreaks of a fierce temper had a kind of value. Notice again, fierce temper. Had a kind of value and even comfort for her mother, because there was at least an intelligible earnestness in the mood, instead of the fitful caprice that so often thwarted her in the child's manifestations. So here, caprice means like whimsy, meaning like you're quick to change your mood, right? You just all of a sudden change your behavior or your mood. It appalled her, nevertheless, to discern here again a shadowy reflection of the evil that had existed in herself. Again, this idea of having evil. All this enmity and passion had Pearl inherited by inalienable right out of Hester's heart. So there, it's again repeating that the reason Pearl is like how she is because of what her mom did, right? So Pearl, that's a P, is a product, which has now been told to us several times, of what Hester did. So it makes sense that she then is like this way in her personality and behavior. And enmity means like hostility. Okay. Mother and daughter stood together in the same circle of seclusion from human society. They only have each other, remember? They're both secluded and ostracized and on the outskirts of town. And in the nature of the child seemed to be perpetuated those unquiet elements that had distracted Hester Prynne before Pearl's birth, but had since begun to be soothed away by the softening influences of maternity. So this, of course, is motherhood. At home, within and around her mother's cottage, Pearl wanted not a wide and various circle of acquaintance. The spell of life went forth from her ever creative spirit, and communicated itself to 1,000 objects, as a torch kindles a flame wherever it may be applied. There's a simile. So again, here we're seeing that Pearl has a very active imagination. The unlikeliest materials, a stick, a bunch of rags, a flower, were the puppets of Pearl's witchcraft. Interesting. Witchcraft. So this is her creativity coming out, how she has no actual human friends, but she makes her own friends, her own relationships out of inanimate things that she then imagines ideas upon them. And without undergoing an outward change, became spiritually adapted to whatever drama occupied the stage of her inner world. There you're again being reiterated that she has an active imagination. Her one baby voice served a multitude of imaginary personages. So she actually acts out. So acting. Old and young to talk with all. The pine trees, aged, black and solemn, and flinging groans and other melancholy utterances on the breeze, needed little transformation to figure as Puritan elders. So again, she doesn't like the Puritans. The ugliest weeds of the garden were their children. So notice the children are ugly weeds because she doesn't like them, whom Pearl smote down and uprooted most unmercifully. It was wonderful, the vast variety of forms into which she threw her intellect, and with no continuity, indeed, but darting up and dancing, always in a state of preternatural activity, soon sinking down, as if exhausted by so rapid and feverish a tide of life. So again, we don't have an actual tide of life, so we have a metaphor there. And this is, we again see a lot of direct characterization here about Pearl and what she's doing, and seeing that she's often referred to as very intelligent as well, and succeeded by other shapes of a similar wild. It was like nothing so much as the phantasmagoric play of the northern lights. In the mere exercise of the fancy, however, and the sportiveness of a growing mind, there might be little more than was observable in other children of bright faculties, except as Pearl, in the dearth of human playmates, was thrown more upon the visionary throng which she created. So again, her imagination's at play, right? This idea that she pretends to have Puritans that then she destroys. The singularity lay in the hostile feelings with which the child regarded all these offspring of her own heart and mind. Remember, she's very anti-Puritan. She never created a friend, but seemed always to be sowing broadcast the dragon's teeth, whence sprung a harvest of armed enemies against whom she rushed to battle. Again, this destroying the Puritans in her imagination with her play. It was inexpressibly sad, then what depth of sorrow to a mother who felt in her own heart the cause. So it seems kind of like Hester blames herself for some of these questionable, maybe, of course, doesn't fit into society elements about Pearl. To observe in one so young this constant recognition of an adverse world, and so fierce a training of the energies that were to make good her cause in the contest that must ensue. So, of course, Hester feels like, okay, well, for her own life, right, Pearl's never going to fit in, at least not to this society. Gazing at Pearl, Hester Prynne often dropped her work upon her knees, and cried out with an agony which she would fain have hidden, but which made utterance for itself betwixt speech and a groan. O Father in heaven, if thou art still my Father, what is this being which I have brought into the world? So again, she's, Hester seems fearful here. That she's brought something evil into the world. And Pearl, overhearing the ejaculation or aware, through some more subtile channel of those throbs of anguish, would turn her vivid and beautiful little face upon her mother, smile with sprite-like intelligence, and resume her play. So she smiles at this. So notice Pearl's reaction. To this. One peculiarity of the child's deportment remains yet to be told. The very first thing which she had noticed in her life was what? Not the mother's smile, responding to it as other babies do, by that faint embryo smile of the little mouth, remembered so doubtfully afterwards, and with such fond discussion whether it were indeed a smile. By no means. But that first object of which Pearl seemed to become aware was, shall we say it, the scarlet letter on Hester's bosom. So, right, first thing, P notices about H, even as a baby, is the A. And again, not surprisingly, since they're both symbols for the same, one day, as her mother stooped over the cradle, the infant's eyes had been caught by the glimmering of the gold embroidery about the letter, and putting up her little hand, she grasped at it, smiling, not doubtfully, but with a decided gleam. So she's often described as smiling at things, right? Looking at Hester's smile, that gave her face the look of a much older child. She's often described as having, right, this kind of maturity and like intellect, older than her years. Then, gasping for breath, did Hester Prynne clutch the fatal token, instinctively endeavoring to tear it away. So Hester tries to hide the H. So infinite was the torture inflicted by the intelligent touch of Pearl's baby hand. Again, as if her mother's agonized gesture were meant only to make sport for her. So again, she doesn't, when her mother reacts this way, this negative way, she reacts the opposite. Pearl, look into her eyes and smile. Again, this repetition, right, of smiling at these negative reactions of her mother's. From that epoch, except when the child was asleep, Hester had never felt a moment's safety, not a moment's calm enjoyment of her. So it seems like Pearl's a handful. As far as dealing with her as a parent to child. Weeks, it is true, would sometimes elapse during which Pearl's gaze might never once be fixed upon the scarlet letter. But then again, it would come at unawares, like the stroke of sudden death. So there we have a simile. And always with that peculiar smile and odd expression of the eyes. So again, repeated the smile. And notice this word choice, odd expression, right? That there's seemingly something sort of strange about her. And again, that she doesn't fit society's rules because she comes from the breaking of a rule. Once this freakish, elvish cast came into the child's eyes, while Hester was looking at her own image in them, as mothers are fond of doing, and suddenly, for women in solitude and with troubled hearts, are pestered with unaccountable delusions. She fancied that she beheld, not her own miniature portrait, but another face, in the small black mirror of Pearl's eye. It was a face fiend-like, full of smiling malice, yet bearing the semblance of features that she had known full well, though seldom with a smile, and never with malice in them. It was as if an evil spirit possessed the child, and had just then peeped forth in mockery. Many a time afterwards had Hester been tortured, though less vividly, by the same illusion. Okay, so this part here seems interesting to me, because there's something that comes over Pearl sometimes, a fiend-like, so something that's smiling with malice, that there's something evil sometimes about her, where she's seeing not her own face, but another. So what or who is she seeing? Is this a relation to the devil? Is that what she sometimes seems like, right? That they'll talk about this black man in the forest character. And this seems to very much trouble Hester, right? Torture Hester. And it's something that she's imagining. In the afternoon of a certain summer's day, after Pearl grew big enough to run about, she amused herself with gathering handfuls of wild flowers. So again, connecting Pearl to nature and flinging them one by one at her mother's bosom, dancing up and down like a little elf. She's referred to a little elf a few times now, so this is a simile. And this idea of P as an elf has been repeated. That's repetition there. Has been repeated a few times. And whenever she hit the scarlet letter, Hester's first motion had been to cover her bosom with her clasped hands. But whether from pride or resignation, or a feeling that her penance might best be wrought out by this unutterable pain, she resisted the impulse and sat erect, pale as death, simile again, looking sadly into little Pearl's wild eyes. Wild. Still came the battery of flowers, almost invariably hitting the mark, and covering the mother's breast, which hurts for which she could find no balm in this world, nor knew. So pausing there for 1 second. So she's throwing, P is throwing flowers at the A. So she's doing something kind of odd, right? Like that's kind of mocking it or really fixated on it and focused on it. And this, kind of weirds her mother out. How to seek it in another. At last, her shot being all expended, the child stood still and gazed at Hester with that little laughing image of a fiend peeping out. Again, this idea of a fiend being like an evil spirit, right? Or a demon. Or whether it peeped or no, her mother so imagined it, from the unsearchable abyss of her black eyes. Child, what art thou? Cried the mother. Oh, I am your little Pearl, answered the child. But while she said it, Pearl laughed. So she's often laughing and smiling. Oops. And began to dance up and down with the humorsome gesticulation of a little imp, whose next freak might be to fly upon the chimney. So, again, notice her actions here. The dancing and acting. Art thou my child in very truth? Asked Hester. Nor did she put the question altogether idly, but for the moment with a portion of genuine earnestness. For such was Pearl's wonderful intelligence, that her mother half doubted whether she were not acquainted with the secret spell of her existence. So, does she know, right? Somehow instinctively what her mother did, right? Is that somehow just inside her and might not now reveal herself? Yes, I am little Pearl, repeated the child, continuing her antics. Thou art not my child. Thou art no Pearl of mine, said the mother, half playfully, for it was often the case that a sportive impulse came over her in the midst of her deepest suffering. Tell me then what thou art, and who sent thee hither. Tell me, mother, said the child seriously, coming up to Hester and pressing herself close to her knees. Do thou tell me? Thy heavenly Father sent thee. So this referring to God, answered Hester Prynne. But she said it with a hesitation that did not escape the acuteness of the child. So she hesitates. Like when saying that. And very intelligent and astute Pearl picks up on that. Whether moved only by her ordinary freakishness, again, the words associated with Pearl, or because an evil spirit prompted her, she put up her small forefinger and touched the scarlet letter. So this idea that she somehow knows. He did not send me, cried she positively. I have no heavenly Father. So notice Pearl is not going to be fitting in as a Puritan. And she's saying she doesn't come from God. "Hush, Pearl, hush. Thou must not talk so," answered the mother, suppressing a groan. "He sent us all into this world. He sent even me, thy mother. Then much more thee. Or if not, thou strange and elfish child, whence didst thou come?" So notice Pearl, in Hester's eyes, does come from God. Tell me," repeated Pearl, no longer seriously, but laughing, and capering about the floor. "It is thou that must tell me." But Hester could not resolve the query, being herself in a dismal labyrinth of doubt. She remembered betwixt a smile and a shudder the talk of the neighboring townspeople, who, seeking vainly elsewhere for the child's paternity, meaning the child's father, and observing some of her odd attributes, had given out that poor little Pearl was a demon offspring. And it looks like Hester's not totally sure. She can't resolve the query. So this, of course, is hearing what other people are saying, the talk of the neighborhood. And we often have this kind of role in the novel of gossip. And they're looking for who is the dad, right? And they notice that she's strange, right? This word odd is often associated with her. Such as, ever since old Catholic times, had occasionally been seen on earth through the agency of their mother's sin. So interesting. So as a result of, I guess, it being Hester's fault, right, in the relationship she had with Dimmesdale, and to promote some foul and wicked purpose. Luther, according to the scandal of his monkish enemies, was a brat of that. So here we have an allusion to Martin Luther, who was in the 1400s, 14 to, I think he dies in the mid 1500s, and he was part of the Protestant Reformation, and he basically came to reject a lot of the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, and he was like a German monk philosopher. Luther, according to the scandal of his monkish enemies, was a brat of that hellish breed, nor was Pearl the only child to whom this inauspicious origin was assigned, among other New England Puritans. So we see here inauspicious, which means like unpromising, like not going to be successful. All right, so a couple things to maybe, if you have some extra note space here. So this chapter obviously focuses a lot on Pearl as a character and also Pearl as a symbol. We find out a lot about her. She's physically very beautiful, but she's also not like the other kids. She doesn't follow the rules. She's not a Puritan, and she has no friends, and she's very mischievous and capricious, whimsical. And we know that because she is a product of, as the chapter tells us several times, she's a product of adultery and of love, of passion, but also she's a product of something that was a sin and a crime at the time. So if you'll notice, Pearl doesn't fit into this society, and that's said over and over again. We know that the Puritans believed that extramarital sex was evil and a sin, and they thought that it was actually influenced and caused by the devil. And so you see that Pearl oftentimes has that dark side, that evil or devil character connected to her. Here in this chapter, we also have Hawthorne is continuing to condemn the Puritan society. He's clearly doing that when he makes this interesting contrast between how Hester was treated by the community, the Puritans, and how God is treating her, right? God has given her a lovely child, a Pearl. And you see, continuing in this chapter, how society is treating both Hester and Pearl. The extension of the sentence continues to Pearl. And so we do see here that Hawthorne is being critical of the Puritanic code of law. And maybe Pearl represents a change for the future, that things will be different in the years to come.